She's probably been put in there because, according to Donald Trump, she's a 10. You know that's what it is.
The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. A heavy cloud hanging in the air as everyone waited for the judge to announce the verdict. The case was one that had captivated not just legal professionals, but millions of viewers across the nation. Joy Behar, the beloved and often controversial co-host of The View, stood in front of the judge with her defense team at her side, her face a mix of determination and anxiety. What had started as a defamation lawsuit had quickly escalated into a public spectacle. Behar had never been one to shy away from controversy. Her outspoken views on politics, celebrities, and society had earned her both passionate supporters and harsh critics. But no one could have anticipated the dramatic turn of events that would unfold in that courtroom. A turn that would change everything for Behar. As the judge prepared to read the verdict, the room seemed to hold its breath. The tension in the air was so thick that it felt like you could cut it with a knife. Behar's legal team sat silently, watching as the judge began to speak. But the words that came next were not what anyone had expected. It wasn't just the severity of the verdict that caused a ripple through the room. It was the suddenness with which Behar collapsed. One moment, she was standing there, facing the consequences of her actions, and the next moment, she was on the floor, her body crumpling in shock. The gasps from the audience filled the room as people rushed to her side. But it was clear this was no ordinary courtroom drama. This was something much more serious, and no one was sure what would happen next. Behar's collapse seemed to freeze time in that moment. Was it the weight of the verdict that caused her to lose consciousness, or was there something deeper at play? Was the emotional strain of the trial simply too much for her to bear? Or was it possible that there was more to her reaction than just the legal ramifications of her actions? The scene was chaotic, with paramedics rushing in to assess Behar's condition as her supporters and legal team watched in silence, their faces painted with concern. Reporters quickly scrambled to capture the moment, but the real question on everyone's mind was, what would this mean for Behar's future? Could she recover from this dramatic incident? Or had her fate already been sealed? The courtroom was filled with whispers, people exchanging theories about what had caused Behar's collapse. Was it a physical reaction to the stress, or was there something more personal at play? Some speculated that it was a calculated move, a way for Behar to garner sympathy and delay the inevitable sentencing. Others believed that it was a genuine health scare, a sign that the pressure of the trial had taken its toll. In the days that followed, the media couldn't get enough of the story. Headlines flashed across news outlets, and social media was abuzz with speculation. Fans, critics, and the general public alike were glued to their screens, waiting for more updates on Behar's condition and what the future held for the popular TV personality. Joy Behar's collapse in the courtroom marked a shocking turn in what had already been an emotionally charged trial. The defamation lawsuit had been building for months, with Behar accused of making damaging remarks about a prominent figure in the entertainment world. The case had quickly evolved into a media frenzy, with the public hanging on every word exchanged in the courtroom. The high-profile nature of the lawsuit meant that the stakes were higher than ever, not just for Behar, but for her career as well. How could someone who had spent decades building a public persona as a strong, opinionated woman who never backed down from a fight be facing such serious legal consequences? This was a question that everyone was asking, and no one seemed to have a clear answer. The tension was already palpable before the trial began, with the media scrutinizing Behar's every move. The lawsuit was based on claims that her remarks during The View had caused significant harm to a well-known figure. The plaintiff argued that Behar's words had not only damaged their reputation, but had led to severe financial and emotional distress. The case was more than just about words. It was about the impact those words had on someone's life and career. As the trial began, it became clear that the media had already made up its mind about Behar. She was seen by some as a champion of free speech, someone who was simply expressing her opinions as she had done for years on television. But to others, she was a reckless individual who had gone too far, using her platform to hurt people for the sake of drama and attention. As the days of the trial passed, the courtroom became a battleground for both sides. The prosecution was relentless, presenting evidence and calling witnesses who painted Behar as someone who had acted with reckless disregard for the consequences of her words. The defense, on the other hand, worked tirelessly to prove that Bihar had the right to express her views, arguing that the comments made were protected by freedom of speech. But as the trial progressed, it became clear that the outcome would not be as simple as a legal argument about free speech. The case had become about Bihar's public persona, her past actions, and her history of controversial statements. Bihar supporters watched from the sidelines, many of them standing by her, believing that she was simply the target of a legal system that didn't understand her. Fans of The View rallied behind her, pointing out that Bihar's outspoken nature was what had made her a beloved figure in the first place. They argued that this case was an attack on her character, a way to silence someone who had never been afraid to speak the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. The media played a huge role in shaping the public perception of the case, with outlets picking sides and running with whichever angle they believed would generate the most buzz. But as the trial went on, it became clear that there was more at stake than just the verdict itself. Bihar's career, her legacy, and her reputation were all on the line. As the trial continued to unfold, it became evident that there was much more going on behind the scenes than anyone could have imagined. While the media and the public focused on the defamation accusations against Bihar, there were whispers that the case wasn't simply about words. It was about power, influence, and the hidden dynamics of the entertainment industry. The lawsuit that had originally seemed like just another celebrity scandal had quickly morphed into something much more complex. The plaintiff, a prominent figure in the entertainment world, wasn't just suing for defamation. They were making a statement. They wanted to send a message to anyone who might dare to speak out against the powerful elite that controls the industry. Bihar, known for her sharp wit and unapologetic opinions, had crossed a line in the eyes of some of Hollywood's most influential figures. The defamation case was only the tip of the iceberg, with rumors circulating that the plaintiff had deep ties to powerful figures in both the entertainment and political arenas. Bihar's public image as a fearless advocate for free speech was beginning to clash with the realities of the industry that had helped make her a household name. While many fans rallied behind her, defending her right to speak her mind, others began to question whether Bihar had been too bold, too reckless in her pursuit of truth. The real shock, however, came when more details about the lawsuit started to emerge. It wasn't just the comments Bihar had made that had sparked the legal battle. It was the sheer impact her words had on the individual involved. The plaintiff, whose reputation had been severely damaged by Bihar's remarks, was not just seeking financial compensation. They were demanding a public apology and a retraction, something that could be disastrous for Bihar's career. The legal team for the plaintiff had made it clear that they wanted to destroy Bihar's credibility, to strip her of the power she had so carefully built over the years. The courtroom drama was no longer just about defamation. It was about the survival of a career that had defined an era of television. As Bihar's defense team worked tirelessly to counter the accusations, they began to uncover more than just the surface level of the case. They dug into the plaintiff's past, uncovering hidden ties to several other prominent figures in the entertainment world. The more they uncovered, the more it seemed like Bihar had become the target of a well-coordinated effort to silence her. This wasn't just a defamation lawsuit. It was a carefully orchestrated attack designed to put Bihar in her place, to remind her that there are limits to what even the most outspoken public figures can say. Bihar's team tried to present her case in the best light possible, but the pressure was mounting, and it was clear that this battle was far from over. The legal proceedings continued, with both sides fiercely debating the details of the case. Bihar's team focused on the First Amendment, arguing that her comments had been made in the spirit of free speech and had not been intended to cause harm. The prosecution, however, painted her as a reckless figure who had no regard for the consequences of her words. The courtroom drama was intense, with each new argument seeming to escalate the tension. The media continued to sensationalize every development, with headlines casting Bihar as both a victim and a villain in the same breath. But the deeper the trial went, the more questions arose. Was Bihar truly guilty of the accusations, or was there a larger, more complex conspiracy at play? As the trial progressed, the anticipation in the courtroom reached a fever pitch. The stakes were high, and everyone involved knew that the verdict could change the course of Bihar's life and career forever. But nothing could have prepared anyone for the shocking moment that occurred just before the judge was set to deliver the verdict. The atmosphere in the room was tense, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air. Everyone knew that this was the moment that would define the outcome of the trial. Bihar stood at the defense table, her face a mixture of hope and dread. She had fought hard for her defense, but it was clear that the outcome was uncertain. Then, as the judge prepared to announce the sentence, the unthinkable happened. Bihar, who had been standing with a stoic expression, suddenly collapsed. Her body gave way beneath her, and she crumpled to the floor in front of the stunned courtroom. The room went silent as people rushed to her side, trying to help. The shock was palpable. No one knew whether this was a genuine medical emergency or if it was a calculated move to delay the proceedings. But what was clear in that moment was that Bihar had completely lost control, and the weight of the trial was too much for her to bear. For a moment, the courtroom was thrown into chaos. The paramedics were quickly called in, and the attention shifted away from the trial and onto Bihar's health. Was this a sign of something more serious? Was the emotional toll of the trial finally catching up with her? Or was there more to this collapse than met the eye? The suddenness of it all left everyone speechless. The media, which had been covering the trial relentlessly, quickly pivoted to focus on Bihar's health. News outlets and social media erupted with speculation about the cause of her collapse, with many questioning whether it was a genuine medical emergency or part of a larger strategy to sway public opinion. Bihar's defense team was quick to respond, asking for privacy while her health was being assessed. But behind the scenes, legal experts began to wonder whether the collapse could impact the outcome of the trial. Could this dramatic moment be used to delay sentencing? Would the judge take Bihar's health into consideration when delivering the verdict? The questions mounted, and the situation became even more complicated as time passed. What had started as a defamation lawsuit had now turned into a media frenzy, and the public was left to wonder what would happen next. Would Bihar make a full recovery and face the consequences of her actions, or would this incident mark the beginning of a new chapter in her life? As Bihar was taken out of the courtroom, her collapse became the focal point of every news outlet. The media had already been obsessed with the trial, but now the story had shifted. The courtroom had become the epicenter of a media frenzy, and Bihar's health became the most pressing issue for journalists and fans alike. In the days following the collapse, the world watched with bated breath as Bihar's legal team remained tight-lipped about her condition. The speculation grew. Was this collapse a genuine health scare, or was it an act? Could Bihar be using this moment as a way to gain sympathy and delay the inevitable consequences of her actions? The fallout from her collapse extended far beyond the courtroom. Fans, critics, and celebrities alike began to weigh in on the situation. Some expressed genuine concern for Bihar's well-being, offering messages of support and encouragement. Others, however, were more skeptical. Could Bihar be using her health as a way to manipulate the court and the public? The media coverage grew more intense as the days passed, with the focus shifting between Bihar's health and her legal fate. The trial, which had once been the primary concern, now seemed secondary to the drama unfolding in the courtroom and beyond. But amid all the chaos, one question lingered. What would happen to Bihar's career in the aftermath of this incident? The public had seen a side of her that was vulnerable, and many wondered whether this would change the way people viewed her. Would she be able to recover from this collapse, both physically and professionally? Or had the damage been done, not just to her career, but to her public image? Bihar's future hung in the balance, and no one knew what the next chapter of her life would look like. As the days passed after Bihar's dramatic collapse in the courtroom, the media frenzy only intensified. Every moment following her fall became a spectacle, with reporters, bloggers, and social media users dissecting every aspect of the incident. Was this a genuine medical emergency, or was it a calculated move to manipulate the courtroom and the public? The speculation ran wild, with different factions of the public and media casting their own theories and opinions. Some believed that the collapse was a real health crisis, a sign that the pressure of the trial had finally taken its toll on the usually bold and outspoken Bihar. These supporters were quick to defend her, calling for respect and privacy while she recovered. Others, however, were less convinced. Critics of Bihar's persona and career pointed out that her collapse could have been a strategic attempt to sway public sympathy. Given the high stakes of the trial and the reputation that Bihar had built over the years, some suggested that this could be a calculated move to distract from the serious legal ramifications she faced. The courtroom drama had already drawn significant attention, but now it was Bihar's health and the uncertainty surrounding her collapse that had captured the collective imagination of the public. Speculation spread like wildfire on social media platforms, with many users voicing their opinions on whether or not the collapse was genuine. Hashtags such as #PrayForJoy and #JusticeForJoy trended for days, with fans and critics alike expressing their reactions to the unprecedented turn of events. Despite the chaos and speculation, Bihar's legal team remained silent, offering only brief statements to reassure the public that her health was their top priority. But the silence only fueled the speculation. What was really going on behind closed doors? Had Bihar's team orchestrated this moment to buy time or to influence the outcome of the trial? Some legal experts suggested that the timing of the collapse might have been strategically designed to delay proceedings, potentially giving Bihar more time to mount a defense or appeal the charges. Others questioned whether the judge would be swayed by the incident, suggesting that the collapse could lead to a softer sentence or even a retrial. The longer Bihar's legal team remained silent, the more the media's focus shifted to the potential implications of the collapse. Could this be a game changer in her legal battle? Would it result in a delay or even a reduction of her sentence? Fans and critics alike couldn't help but wonder how this unexpected turn of events would affect the future of her case and her career. Some feared that her public image might never recover, while others speculated that Bihar's collapse might be the key to her ultimate redemption. No one knew what would happen next, but one thing was for certain: the world was watching closely, and the next chapter of Bihar's life was about to unfold in the most unpredictable way possible. With Bihar's collapse still fresh in everyone's minds, the question on everyone's lips was clear: how would this unexpected event affect her sentence? The legal implications of the collapse were complex, and many speculated that the incident could have a significant impact on the outcome of the trial. While some believed that the collapse was a genuine medical emergency, others suggested that it could have been a strategic move designed to manipulate the court and the public. Legal experts quickly weighed in, offering their opinions on how this turn of events might play out in the courtroom. One of the most significant questions raised was whether the collapse would lead to a delay in sentencing. Some legal experts suggested that the incident could be used as a reason to postpone the proceedings, allowing Bihar more time to recover and potentially giving her team an opportunity to mount a stronger defense. If the collapse was deemed to have been a result of the stress of the trial, there was a chance that the court might take her health into consideration when delivering the sentence. On the other hand, some critics argued that this might be seen as an attempt to manipulate the court's sympathy and could backfire. The judge, known for being stern and impartial, might view the collapse as a calculated move and refuse to let it influence the outcome of the case. The tension surrounding the potential impact of the collapse only grew as the days went on. Legal teams on both sides of the case began preparing for the next steps, but no one could predict how the judge would ultimately respond. Was the collapse a medical emergency, or was it a strategy designed to change the narrative of the trial? Could it convince the judge to issue a lighter sentence, or would it be dismissed as a diversion from the real issues at hand? As the legal teams continued to strategize, the public continued to speculate, and the courtroom drama became even more complex. Bihar's fate was hanging in the balance, and the collapse seemed to be the catalyst for an even more intense legal battle. As the media storm surrounding Bihar's collapse raged on, the public's reaction became a focal point of the unfolding drama. Fans and critics alike were quick to voice their opinions on social media, with reactions ranging from concern and sympathy to cynicism and skepticism. For Bihar's loyal fan base, the collapse was a heartbreaking and unexpected moment. Many expressed their support for her, wishing her a speedy recovery and standing by her side as she faced what seemed to be an insurmountable challenge. Bihar had always been a fierce advocate for free speech and progressive causes, and her supporters felt a deep sense of loyalty toward her. They weren't about to turn their backs on her now, especially not when she was facing such a difficult situation. On the other hand, There were those who viewed Bihar's collapse with suspicion. Some questioned whether it was a genuine medical emergency or a dramatic tactic designed to shift public opinion. They wondered if Bihar had orchestrated the incident in an attempt to manipulate the media and sway the court's sympathies in her favor. Social media was flooded with mixed reactions, with some calling for compassion and others accusing Bihar of using her health as a tool to avoid the consequences of her actions. The debate was fierce, and as the story developed, the public's verdict seemed to be split. The media coverage only fueled the divide, with some outlets focusing on Bihar's health and others continuing to report on the legal battle. While the public speculated about whether Bihar's collapse was part of a larger strategy, there was no denying the emotional weight of the moment. It was clear that Bihar's career, reputation, and future were now at a crossroads, and the world was watching closely to see what would happen next. Would she be able to recover from this collapse, both physically and professionally? Or would this mark the beginning of the end for one of television's most outspoken figures? As the days passed since Bihar's collapse in court, the big question that everyone was asking was how would she face the public in the aftermath of such a dramatic event? Bihar, known for her unapologetic and bold personality, had always been the one to stand in the spotlight and voice her opinions without hesitation. But now, the public was wondering if the collapse would lead to a change in how she approached the world. Would she continue to hold strong to her beliefs, or would the pressure of the situation cause her to rethink her approach to her career and public life? The collapse had thrust Bihar into a new light, and many people were curious to see how she would react. For years, Bihar had been the one who made headlines for her controversial opinions and fearless stance on various political and social issues. But now, her reputation was on the line, and her health had become a focal point of the conversation. Some fans believed that Bihar would come out of this stronger than ever.
I execute judgment on you, Satan, you destroyer, you killer, you get out, you break your power, you get off this nation. I demand judgment on you.
Kenneth Copeland, one of America's wealthiest and most controversial televangelists, was sentenced to life imprisonment today after a stunning trial that exposed decades of financial fraud and tax evasion. The 87-year-old founder of Kenneth Copeland Ministries showed no emotion as Judge Martin Reynolds delivered the maximum sentence, effectively ending the preacher's empire that once spanned continents and reached millions of followers worldwide.
You come down from your place of authority, destroyer. You come down and you crawl on your belly.
The case against Copeland began 3 years ago when a former financial officer at Kenneth Copeland Ministries turned whistleblower, providing federal investigators with thousands of documents detailing what prosecutors called the largest religious fraud scheme in American history. Michael Thornton, who had served as deputy financial controller for the ministry for 14 years, secretly copied financial records, offshore account details, and internal communications before leaving the organization in 2020. "I couldn't be part of it anymore," Thornton testified during the trial. "Watching people send their last dollars while Mr. Copeland used their sacrificial giving to buy yet another jet or property, it broke me. I knew God was calling me to expose the truth, no matter the cost." The subsequent investigation by the IRS, FBI, and Department of Justice uncovered evidence that Copeland had personally diverted over $150 million in church donations to fund his lavish lifestyle, including his fleet of private jets, multiple mansions, and luxury vehicles. Bank records revealed that Copeland had spent $17.5 million on private aircraft in a single year, while claiming to donors that their funds were supporting missionary work and humanitarian efforts. Prosecutors demonstrated that Copeland had created an elaborate network of shell companies and offshore accounts to hide assets from the IRS. The ministry had established more than 30 separate entities across the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Liechtenstein that served no legitimate religious purpose, but functioned to obscure the flow of funds. Most damaging was evidence that he had instructed staff to falsify donation records and ministry expenses to maintain the organization's tax-exempt status while using the ministry as his personal bank account. The defendant didn't just blur the line between ministry funds and personal use, he erased it entirely. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Wilson told the jury. For Mr. Copeland, the ministry's bank accounts were his bank accounts. Donor dollars didn't go to spread the gospel. They went to spread his empire. The courtroom in Fort Worth, Texas, was packed with former followers throughout the trial, many of whom had donated significant portions of their life savings to Copeland's ministry after his promises that God would multiply their gifts. Some attendees openly wept as details of the fraud were described during the 7-week trial, particularly when prosecutors played videos of Copeland soliciting seed faith donations from financially vulnerable followers while flying between his numerous properties on ministry-funded private jets. One video from 2018 showed Copeland telling viewers, "The Lord said to me, 'Tell my people to give their best offering ever, and I will cancel their debts.'" Immediately following this broadcast, the ministry received over $20 million in donations, of which prosecutors proved $6 million went directly to purchasing a waterfront property in Florida under a shell company controlled by Copeland family members. The defendant preyed upon the faith and trust of thousands of sincere believers, said U.S. Attorney Caroline Marchand during her closing arguments. He exploited their religious devotion for personal gain while claiming divine approval for his actions. This case isn't about religious freedom, it's about fraud, plain and simple. Copeland's defense team, led by high-profile attorney James Morrison, had attempted to portray the case as government persecution of religious organizations. They argued that the luxurious lifestyle was necessary for Copeland's worldwide ministry, and that donors understood their contributions would support his work, including his travel needs. Morrison repeatedly cited the ministry's international reach and Copeland's need to travel as a representative of God's abundance. The prosperity gospel that Mr. Copeland preaches includes the belief that God rewards faithfulness with material blessings, Morrison told the court. His lifestyle was a testament to the very principles he espoused, and his followers understood this. These weren't secrets. The jets and properties were visible symbols of the success of his ministry and the truth of his teachings. This defense strategy collapsed when prosecutors presented recorded conversations between Copeland and his financial advisors discussing how to shield the jets from government busybodies and keep the real numbers away from the sheep, referring to his followers. In one particularly damning recording from 2017, Copeland could be heard laughing about a widow who donated her insurance payout, saying, "She thinks she's getting a heavenly return, but the only return is my new hangar." The prosecution also introduced internal emails directing staff to create fake mission projects for fundraising campaigns that had no actual operations. One email from Copeland to his son John instructed him to create some pictures of those African children we supposedly helped for a fundraising broadcast. Perhaps most devastating to the defense was testimony from former ministry insiders who described a culture of fear and secrecy within the organization. Sarah Williams, who worked as Copeland's personal assistant for 8 years, testified that staff were required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements and were threatened with both legal action and divine punishment if they questioned financial practices. He told us that questioning his spending was questioning God himself, Williams testified. He said anyone who exposed ministry business would face God's wrath. We were all terrified, not just of losing our jobs, but of eternal damnation. Williams described how staff members who raised concerns about financial irregularities were immediately terminated and branded as influenced by demonic forces. Former employees were often subjected to public condemnation during service broadcasts, with Copeland telling his audience that these individuals had aligned themselves with Satan to attack God's work. The prosecution also presented evidence that Copeland had knowingly solicited donations for disaster relief efforts and missionary work that were instead diverted to business ventures and property acquisitions. Bank records showed that less than 3% of funds raised for Hurricane Katrina victims ever reached relief organizations, while millions went to a real estate investment company owned by the Copeland family that purchased distressed properties in the affected areas. David Martinez, former director of international missions for the ministry, testified that he was instructed to create fictional reports about missionary activities that never occurred. I was told to write detailed reports about schools and hospitals we had supposedly built in developing countries, Martinez said. In reality, those projects didn't exist. When I expressed concern, Mr. Copeland told me, the donors need to feel good about giving. The details don't matter. The trial took an unexpected turn when Eagle Mountain International Church, the legal name for Copeland's primary ministry organization, attempted to distance itself from Copeland's actions. Church board members filed a motion claiming they had been unaware of the financial improprieties and should not be held liable for Copeland's individual actions. This move backfired when prosecutors produced board meeting minutes showing the members had repeatedly approved transactions, moving funds from ministry accounts to Copeland's personal control. Further investigation revealed that board members had received significant personal benefits, including luxury vehicles, all expense-paid vacations, classified as ministry retreats, and housing allowances, despite not having official ministerial duties. As the guilty verdict was read last week, Copeland remained stoic, occasionally leaning to whisper to his attorneys. His wife Gloria and other family members, who have been conspicuously absent from most of the proceedings, were not present for the verdict or today's sentencing. Sources close to the family indicated that significant tension had developed as various members sought to protect their own interests. During today's sentencing hearing, Judge Reynolds allowed impact statements from several former followers. Mary Thompson, a 76-year-old widow from Oklahoma, described how she donated her entire retirement savings of $340,000 to Copeland's ministry after her husband's death. Mr. Copeland promised me that if I showed my faith through giving, God would restore it many times over, Thompson told the court, her voice breaking. He said it was fear and lack of faith to keep money in savings when it could be planted as seed. Now I live with my daughter because I can't afford housing. While he flew in private jets, I lost everything. Robert Castillo, a former ministry partner from Houston, described how his family donated more than $800,000 over 15 years, much of it borrowed against their home and business, believing they were supporting international mission work. We remortgaged everything we had because Mr. Copeland told us God would bring a 100-fold return. Instead, we lost our business, our home, and nearly our marriage, Castillo said. The worst part wasn't the financial loss, but the spiritual devastation of realizing we'd been deceived by someone we trusted as a man of God. Perhaps the most emotional testimony came from Janet Williams, no relation to Sarah Williams, who described how her late husband had refused potentially life-saving cancer treatment in favor of faith healing, promoted by Copeland's ministry. My husband declined medical treatment and instead sent $25,000 to the ministry's healing school, she testified. Mr. Copeland personally told him that seeking medical treatment showed a lack of faith that would prevent his healing. He died believing he hadn't been faithful enough.
Is healed and well again, saith the mighty
Hallelujah.
Spirit.
Glory.
When given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, Copeland surprised many by declining to express remorse. Instead, he quoted scripture and maintained that his ministry had helped millions of people worldwide. "The Lord knows my heart," Copeland said, standing straight despite his age. This ministry has brought salvation and healing to countless souls across the globe. Man may judge, but God's judgment is what matters. Like the Apostle Paul, I am persecuted for preaching prosperity, but I have kept the faith. I regret nothing because my conscience is clear before God Almighty. Judge Reynolds was unmoved by this response. In delivering the life sentence, he criticized Copeland's extraordinary lack of remorse and the calculated nature of these crimes over decades. "You systematically exploited faith for financial gain," Reynolds stated, his voice stern. "The court cannot ignore the magnitude of this fraud or the vulnerability of the victims who trusted you as a spiritual leader. This sentence reflects not only the financial harm you've caused, but the spiritual damage to those who trusted you." Reynolds continued, "The First Amendment protects religious freedom, including the right to preach prosperity theology or any other doctrine. What it does not protect is fraud committed under the guise of religion. You didn't just fail as a minister, you deliberately deceived those who trusted you most completely." In addition to the life sentence for fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion, the court ordered the forfeiture of assets worth approximately $240 million, including Copeland's 1,500-acre lakefront property near Fort Worth, his fleet of aircraft, including a Gulfstream 5 and Citation X, and numerous real estate holdings across Texas, Colorado, Florida, and California. The judge also ordered restitution to identified victims, though prosecutors acknowledged that recovering funds for all affected donors would be impossible, given the decades-long scope of the fraud. The sentencing included a separate judgment against Eagle Mountain International Church as an organization, with the court appointing a receiver to manage its assets and determine which could be liquidated for victim compensation. The ruling specifically protected legitimate religious functions, while separating them from the vast commercial empire built through fraudulent means. As Copeland was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, reactions among spectators were mixed. Some former followers appeared vindicated, while others seemed stunned that the man they had revered for decades would spend the rest of his life behind bars. "I never thought I'd see this day," said Thomas Richardson, a former ministry donor who had traveled from California for the sentencing. "For years, questioning Kenneth Copeland was like questioning God himself in our community. The manipulation was so complete that even seeing the evidence, some people still can't accept the truth." Outside the courthouse, hundreds of supporters gathered with signs proclaiming Copeland's innocence and claiming religious persecution. Many cited Bible verses about persecution and prophesied divine intervention to free Copeland. Some held signs reading, "Touch not God's anointed," and "Free God's prophet." Diane Reynolds, who identified herself as a 30-year follower of Copeland's ministry, told reporters, "This is spiritual warfare, plain and simple. The government is persecuting a man of God because they fear his message. Brother Copeland helped millions find faith and prosperity. These charges are Satan's attempt to stop the gospel." A smaller group of former followers celebrated the verdict, with some describing the relief of seeing accountability for what they called decades of spiritual abuse and financial exploitation. Several former members had formed support groups during the trial process, finding healing in shared experiences after years of what many described as religious trauma. The impact of Copeland's conviction extends far beyond his own ministry. Legal experts suggest it could lead to greater scrutiny of financial practices at other large religious organizations that operate with limited oversight due to First Amendment protections. This case establishes that claiming religious freedom doesn't shield organizations from accountability for fraud, explained constitutional law professor Daniel Ortega of Southern Methodist University. The government wasn't questioning Copeland's theology, but his financial dishonesty. That distinction matters tremendously for future cases. Ortega noted that the case might serve as a watershed moment in terms of religious organization accountability. For decades, there's been a hands-off approach to investigating religious organizations due to legitimate First Amendment concerns. This case demonstrates that financial crimes can be prosecuted without entangling the government in theological questions. The IRS has already announced expanded investigations into several large ministries with similar financial structures, and lawmakers have called for hearing potential reforms to tax exemption laws for religious organizations. Senator Mark Warner, chair of the Banking Committee, announced plans for hearings on ensuring transparency in religious nonprofit organizations without infringing on religious liberty. Industry watchdogs who have long called for greater scrutiny of prosperity gospel ministries see the verdict as validation. Trinity Foundation, which investigates religious fraud, issued a statement calling the verdict long overdue recognition of widespread financial abuse in certain segments of religious broadcasting. The Tele-evangelist community has been largely silent on the verdict, with few of Copeland's former associates willing to comment publicly. Those who did speak mostly expressed shock and called for prayer for all involved. A few prominent prosperity preachers have quietly removed references to their associations with Copeland from their websites and social media accounts. Kenneth Copeland Ministries released a brief statement indicating that operations would continue under new leadership and that they were committed to organizational transformation and restored trust. The statement emphasized that the message of faith remains true even when human vessels fail, and promised comprehensive financial reforms. However, insiders suggest that without its founder and with assets frozen, the ministry's future is uncertain. Attendance at Eagle Mountain International Church has reportedly declined by over 60% since the indictment, and several affiliated ministers have established independent organizations to distance themselves from the scandal. The case has prompted soul-searching among many evangelical Christians, particularly those who had embraced prosperity theology. Several prominent Christian theologians have used the moment to call for doctrinal reform and a return to biblical stewardship principles, rather than promises of material wealth. Russell Moore, public theologian and former president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, wrote in Christianity Today, "The Copeland case should prompt serious reflection in evangelical circles about how we've allowed the gospel of Christ to be distorted into a mechanism for wealth accumulation. Jesus warned about those who would make merchandise of God's people, and we've seen those warnings fulfilled in our time." The case has also renewed debate about oversight of religious organizations, which are currently exempt from filing the detailed financial disclosures required of other nonprofits. Senator Chuck Grassley, who previously investigated several televangelists, including Copeland, but took no legislative action, acknowledged that the time may have come for reasonable transparency requirements that protect legitimate religious organizations while preventing abuse. As for Copeland himself, at 87, the life sentence effectively ensures he will spend his remaining years in federal prison. He has been designated to serve his term at the Federal Medical Center in Fort Worth, a facility for inmates requiring specialized medical care, keeping him near the empire he built and lost. The psychological impact on his followers remains one of the most profound aspects of the case. Dr. John Jalalich, a sociologist specializing in cults and high-control groups, explained, "For people who built their entire faith system around Copeland's teachings, this conviction is psychologically devastating. They're experiencing what we call reality shock, when the constructed reality they've lived in suddenly collapses." Support groups for former followers have emerged across the country, many led by licensed therapists specializing in religious trauma. These groups report being overwhelmed with people seeking help, processing their experiences, and rebuilding their faith or establishing new belief systems. "I lost 30 years of my life and thousands of dollars to this ministry," said Emily Cartwright, who now leads a support group in Dallas. "But the worst loss was my authentic relationship with God, which was replaced with fear, performance, and financial exploitation. Many of us are having to completely rebuild our spiritual lives from scratch." The broader prosperity gospel movement, which teaches that God rewards increased faith and donations with material blessing, appears to be undergoing a reformation in the wake of the scandal. Several prominent prosperity preachers have modified their messages, placing greater emphasis on spiritual growth and responsible stewardship rather than material wealth. Copeland's attorneys have already announced plans to appeal, claiming procedural errors and constitutional overreach. Lead attorney James Morrison told reporters outside the courthouse, "This conviction represents government intrusion into religious matters in violation of the First Amendment." Mr. Copeland operated a ministry according to his sincerely held religious beliefs about prosperity. We will appeal this verdict and expect it to be overturned on constitutional grounds. Legal experts note that the overwhelming evidence and comprehensive financial documentation make a successful appeal unlikely. The prosecution was careful to focus solely on financial crimes rather than questioning religious doctrines. And Judge Reynolds repeatedly instructed the jury to consider only the financial evidence, not Copeland's theological positions. For the thousands of followers who once viewed Kenneth Copeland as a divinely appointed messenger, today's sentence marks the end of an era and the beginning of a painful reckoning with decades of misplaced trust. Many former donors expressed a complex mix of emotions: relief at seeing justice served, anger at having been deceived, and grief over the spiritual manipulation they experienced. "I believed in him completely," said Margaret Wilson, a former donor from Arkansas. "I sent money I couldn't afford because I truly believed God would honor that seed and multiply it. Today I feel both vindicated and heartbroken." How do you rebuild faith after something like this? As Copeland begins his sentence, the empire he built over 6 decades lies in ruins, its assets frozen or being liquidated to compensate victims. The private jets that became symbols of his excess are being sold, the sprawling ministry headquarters stands half empty, and the television broadcasts that reached millions have gone dark. Yet perhaps the most significant impact of this case will be on the invisible landscape of faith and trust. For many, Copeland represented not just a religious leader, but a direct channel to divine blessing. His conviction forces a reevaluation not just of one man's ministry, but of an entire theological system that promised material rewards for spiritual devotion. In his final statement to the court before being led away, Copeland remained defiant. "History will vindicate me, and God will reward those who stood by me in this hour of persecution." Whether that prophecy comes true remains to be seen, but what is certain is that the legacy of Kenneth Copeland has been forever altered by today's historic sentence.